Hey guys, you're listening to the We Could Make That podcast, and I'm your host, Andrea Ween. On this show, I interview small batch, independent food makers who've struck out on a noble cause, making the world as tasty as possible. In each episode, I'm digging into their backgrounds, motivations, and passions to decode why and how they started their businesses, and the lessons we can each take back to our own kitchens and lives. Let's get started. Today, I'm taking the podcast in a slightly different direction and talking to a different kind of maker. Food author and historian Rien Fertel. Rien is originally from Lafayette, Louisiana, and in 2012, he hit the road with photographer Denny Colbert to capture the essence of barbecue in the South. Now, he's turned that research into a new book, recently released by Simon & Schuster. It's called The One True Barbecue: Fire, Smoke, and the Pitmasters Who Cook the Whole Hog. Rien's work has also been featured in Savoir Magazine, Southern Living, and The Local Palate, among many others. Stick with it as our conversation kind of hops around from Rien's time growing up in the kitchens of Louisiana to why he ended up attending grad school and why an unlikely contender is his favorite food city. Enjoy the show. Hey, Rien, how are you? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you have been very busy lately. Give me just a quick rundown of what you've been up to.
Well, I've been on the road for the past almost a month now, promoting my new book, The One True Barbecue, which is it's a barbecue book, but a barbecue book without recipes, without any sense of being a guidebook. It's a narrative barbecue book. It's a first-person barbecue book about searching for people who are doing something very rare, something very traditional in the American South.
Very cool. So yeah, you and I met because our good friend Denny Colbert and you went on a barbecue bus tour of the South a few years back. So before that, had barbecue played a big role in your life?
No, I grew up in a town called Lafayette, Louisiana, and southern Louisiana doesn't have much of a barbecue culture at all. Chains from Memphis and elsewhere would occasionally move into town and quickly evaporate. So I didn't have barbecue in my life. There was always a grill in the backyard, but it was always covered by a sheet. My stepfather, my mom, they weren't barbecue cooks. They didn't grill out. So barbecue wasn't a thing. I didn't particularly love or even like barbecue.
So how did you go from being someone who really didn't like it to writing a whole book and dedicating years of your life now to this cause?
And it was years. Yeah, it was years. So it was since 2008. I was looking for an adventure in 2008. I was living in New York. I'd been in New York for 3 years since Hurricane Katrina. The storm had sent me up there back in 2005. And in the summer of 2008, I was moving back to New Orleans, where I was before the storm, of course. And I didn't want to move back immediately after I gave up my apartment in Brooklyn. And so I called up a mentor of mine. His name is John T. Edge, and he runs an organization called the Southern Foodways Alliance. At the University of Mississippi in the town of Oxford. And what we do is document, study, celebrate the diversity of Southern foodways. They do this amazing stuff. They're about 15 years old now, 17 years, the organization. Back in 2008, I wanted an adventure, so I begged him. I begged him to let me do anything. I was willing to move to Oxford. I was willing to go on the road and be his assistant. He was just, coming into his own. He's a wonderful writer, and he has a really big high profile now. I wanted something. I didn't want to come back to New Orleans. I didn't want to spend the summer in New York. So he said, move to Tennessee. And I didn't especially want to move to Tennessee. And he encouraged me to move to Memphis that summer and document barbecue, the oldest barbecue restaurants in the western portion of that state. And so this meant sitting down, doing oral histories, or basically very long-form interviews with cooks, pitmasters, restaurant owners, family members, extended family members, sometimes customers, and taking pictures to document kind of the whole scene too. And that's what I did for the summer. It did not make me fall in love with barbecue.
Interesting. So we just finished our 6-week road trip and we kind of did our own barbecue trail up
Oh,
through.
yeah?
We were in actually New Orleans and we were supposed to go to Tallahassee the next day. And we were like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we want some barbecue, and rerouted and went to Memphis. And
Oh, you
then
did? Okay.
yeah, we went to Memphis and then Alabama, Tennessee, and North Carolina. And I have to say, Memphis was my favorite. It was my favorite barbecue.
Where'd you go?
We went to, I think, a place called the Barbecue Shop.
Uh-huh, yeah.
And there was another one that I can't remember the name of at the moment. But yeah, we liked Memphis barbecue best.
Memphis has a great barbecue culture. The barbecue shop is wonderful. There's other really great restaurants in town. And I said I didn't fall in love with barbecue in 2008. And I think that's because it meant work. Barbecue meant work. It wasn't, all that enjoyable. It was a hustle to document these places, to get them all done. I did 25, I think, which does it over the course of about 2 months, which sounds like a lot of time, but restaurateurs are busy people. They don't like to sit down. They don't like to spend time with reporters a lot of time, especially a reporter who then looked like he was still in high school, and a lot of them thought I was doing a high school project because I looked so young.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, is how were you received? Kind of this boy from Louisiana, he'd just come from New York. Yeah, I mean, it had to have been a little tough to get people to really open up in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I was a complete outsider. I was an outsider geographically, culturally. Yeah, but also I did grow up in restaurants, and so that was kind of an entry, an in. It always worked to talk with restaurant people about my own restaurant background. So my grandmother started a chain of restaurants, and my mom ran the one in Lafayette, Louisiana, where I grew up. And I grew up in the kitchen of that restaurant. She was a single woman, single mom. Before there was daycare, before there was any sort of summer camp or activities, I had a dozen or more parents and grandparents that would take care of me, that were the kitchen staff and the wait staff.
Your knife skills as an 8-year-old were on point?
No knife skills. Well, actually, I think I was cutting onions. I was definitely peeling potatoes well before the age of 10.
Like husking corn, that was always my least favorite task. Like, I loved corn in the summers, but my mom always used to make me husk the corn, and I hated it.
Oh, thankfully we didn't have corn, but I had to chop lettuce for salads. I moved to the salad station. I would wash dishes. It was fun. And then I moved to the front of the house eventually when it became of legal check cashing age. Talking about restaurant culture, and restaurant people can recognize, I think, other restaurant people. I don't know if it's something about the way restaurant people look. It's certainly something about the way they talk and can talk about that culture and the way businesses work and run. So that definitely helped. But I didn't love Memphis barbecue because it was work, and I was eating so much of it. Sometimes I'd eat 5 meals of barbecue a day, which is disgusting. It's relatively disgusting. I mean, it's not healthy.
The paleo people would argue against you, but
yeah, sure. But it was in the outskirts of Memphis that this book really came about years ago, back in 2008. East of Memphis, it's very rural. It's country. It's soybean and cotton farms. It's very hilly. This is between Memphis and Nashville. And it's also what people refer to as whole hog country. So this is, in Memphis, they eat ribs. If anyone's been to Memphis, they eat those dry ribs that they're, justly famous for. They eat pulled pork barbecue, and that barbecue comes from a shoulder, so a piece of the pig, from one of the legs of the pig. But east of Memphis, in the country, they're cooking whole pigs. So these are 150, upwards of 200 or more pounds of meat cooking all at one time. And I found one guy in particular, Ricky Parker, who could cook 12 or more overnight. And this was restaurant work to the extreme. It was barbecue taken to notches that I didn't know existed. And it was exciting. It was weird. This man, Ricky Parker, he was a nut. I didn't know how he survived, how he did the work that he did. And so it was this form of barbecue that I fell in love with. And and eventually wrote a book about.
Interesting. So yeah, you could say you went for the adventure, but the adventure ended up finding you and then taking you for quite the ride.
Yeah, I found something completely new, which I imagined that out of the city they would be doing something different with barbecue, but I didn't realize that it would be cooking whole hogs over live fire, having to stay up dusk to dawn to cook these things, shoveling coals every 20 minutes, just tremendous kind of brutal work. I didn't figure that I'd kind of fall in love with this, but I fell in love more with the individuals that were doing the cooking than the food itself. The food kind of came later.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions for you. So, as a historian and now a writer who is telling these stories, do you feel a responsibility to the people you're writing about to get it right and to really showcase who they are?
Yeah, in New York, I was in grad school, and that's why I came back to New Orleans to get a PhD in history. So I'm a trained historian. My first book is a very kind of academic reading of New Orleans history. And so when I got on the road in 2008, and I've been doing this, a lot more over the years, and I do a lot more reporting than I do history work nowadays. There's a big difference between going into an archive, going into a library or museum, and calling up these kind of dusty papers that might be hundreds of years old, and kind of sifting through those, and kind of calling up someone who works in a restaurant, someone who is alive, and having to ask questions with them face to face. It's two different hats. But do I feel more responsible? I mean, there's a responsibility I think any historian has to history. You have to get it right. But then I think just like journalism, like there's a great amount of subjectivity to it. You have to decide where the story begins and ends, both whether you're dealing with something, hundreds of years in the past, or something very, very present with people who are here, who can, sit in front of you, who can read your book, who can read your journalism, and call you up the next day and tell you how angry they are. And so I do get that now. My first book, no one could call me up and tell me I was wrong because they've all been dead for 100 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you gotten a lot of those phone calls of people who say that you got it wrong? I mean, it seems like it's a pretty, in-depth, accurate from what I've seen, as a customer account of what might be going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to journalism school. I never took a journalism class, so I have no training in that. I think I'm good at it. I think I'm good at asking questions. I try to be a competent writer and researcher, but I think you're gonna anger people no matter what you do, no matter what you write, no matter what you produce out there in the world. I mean, even if it's a work of fiction, like someone is going to be upset. Someone is not going to be happy with the way their city is portrayed, their gender is portrayed, their world is portrayed, their culture is portrayed, right? If it's a work of fiction. And in a work of nonfiction, in a work of journalism, it's really tough because people's names are right there on the page, I spend a lot of times with these people, and I try to get their story right. I try to do good by them, and it doesn't always work. One person in particular wrote me a really long, nasty email, and attached to that email was an even longer letter. It was really bizarre. But yeah, it was from a
that
former.
One's for you to print out.
That one, I don't know. It was two different things. It was like anger, and then like even more anger in the letter.
So meta.
And yeah, and it was from a spouse to someone who's featured in the book. And the man featured in the book is no longer alive, and she didn't like the way he was portrayed. It's not something I can respond to because I deeply respect and love the person that was featured in the book, who she was upset about, and I did have the blessing of other family members. But I've thought, what would he think, if he were still alive? What would he say to me? And I think he would enjoy it. I think he would think it's great. And so that's what I have to kind of stand on. When I get kind of pushback like that.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a bit. You mentioned that you grew up in a restaurant. Do you have some first memories of food?
Yeah, well, yeah, my first memories of food were not in eating or consuming food. It was in prepping food. I remember the walk-in cooler, which, walk-in coolers in big restaurants are these massive spaces, just like really big walk-in closets that are really, really cold. And I remember the walk-in cooler being full of vats of potatoes, which I had peeled, onions, which I had separated into rings for fried onion rings, and having to push these big tubs, plastic tubs of vegetables back there, and always worrying that the walk-in cooler would lock behind. And despite what you see in movies, like horror movies or whatever, I don't think you can be locked
But I think
inside of
everyone
a
who's worked in
walk-in
a
cooler.
restaurant has
Yeah,
that fear.
yeah,
Everyone's
that's
had it. Like, I
right,
still get it. I'm like, if I ever am like find myself in that
right.
situation, I'm like, oh my God, what if it doesn't open? It's so
Yeah,
cold.
and the light's gonna go out.
Totally.
So I remember that. I remember the production. I remember working on the line. I remember washing dishes. I mentioned before, but it was always alongside people. So I remember people's names. I remember people's faces. I remember the camaraderie of a kitchen, and I was young. I mean, I moved out of the kitchen when I was 14, 15 to the front of the house to be a busboy, and I remember just the relationships in the kitchen, the kind of the love and the hate and the fights, and how it operated as this tremendously beautiful machine during the lunch shift, and how it could just break down at any moment, and how my mom was just like such a fierce leader. It felt like a ship that was like, sailing the seas and could go down at any moment. The music would be blasting always very, very loudly. It would always be urban radio, but like not rap or hip hop. It was like more like love R&B. And to my like 10-year-old ears, it was like really kind of crude music, because it was all about longing, and you can tell it was about like sex and love, and there was something scary about that. And also, and people, and the women especially, would like sing along to these tunes, and I knew there was like some intimacy between them and the radio. I was a kid, so I remember just being, I was a kid in this like very, very, very adult world. And restaurant people, I don't know if restaurants attract a certain type of people, or if they kind of breed a certain amount of people over time and change people. But restaurant people, I think they're fun to be around. They might be more fun to be around than other people. They call it the sin industry for a reason. They do a great amount of sinning, right? So it's long shifts, it's late hours. You go out, and I didn't do this as a kid, of course, but like I realized that it was a thing. But you go out after work, relationships develop that shouldn't be developing. And I remember just it. I remember it was great, just shock and awe of being this little person in this very adult world. That's what restaurants were to me.
Yeah. What did you want to be when you grew up then?
Well, I mean, I wanted to be my grandmother. I wanted to be in the restaurant, but I distinctly remember throughout my life, both when I was young and when I was a teenager, and then in my 20s, both her and my mother telling me that if I ever went into the restaurant business, that they would kill me, and they actually used that word. Or that phrase, "I
How
will
old
kill
were you
you."
at this point?
Oh, it happened. I mean, they'd say it all throughout my life.
Okay,
So
okay.
my grandmother would say it through my teens. She passed away when I was 22, but my mom definitely picked up that thread. And the thing was, when I graduated from college from Tulane University in New Orleans, where I live again now, that was in 2003. I went immediately. I went into the restaurant business. And, and I remember
Because
my
it felt
mom.
comfortable, because it was easy.
Well,
Like, what
I
was the thinking there?
I was given a weird opportunity. I hadn't worked I stopped working in restaurants when at the end of high school, when I graduated from high school, and didn't work in restaurants through college for 4 years. And then I was given an opportunity to manage it was really weird. To manage like a corner store or a bodega or a small grocery. It was called Diamond Street Market. It was in downtown New Orleans, right by the convention center, in kind of this newly rebuilt, the warehouse district is what they call it. And it was, maybe 1,500 square feet of, dry items. There was a sandwich counter in the back, and we'd have daily specials, gumbo on Fridays, red beans and rice on Monday, spaghetti and meatballs on Thursday. It was a very, very New Orleans thing, but it was like you see in any kind of urban environment anywhere in the world. And I ran this place up through Hurricane Katrina. Like it was my thing all day. I did it because the reason I did it was because the job was offered to me like this. If you manage the restaurant, and you'll get paid very little, but if you manage the restaurant, it wasn't a restaurant, the deli grocery, you get to live for free in the beautiful condo above it. And so that's why I did it. It was it was like I was 23 years old. I didn't know what to do with my life. It was like another adventure. Well, I had 13 employees. They were all older than me.
How was
they
that?
Were all. It was strange. I think it took some time to like build some respect. I remember it was a long-standing deli grocery. It had been there 12, 15 years before I moved in, and I remember the first meeting like being introduced as like, oh, the new boss, and them looking at me with just like complete, just like I don't know, like shock or disdain or just confusion.
Right. If you looked like a child in 2008 when you were starting the Memphis project,
yeah,
at 2003,
yeah, I was a total kid, and I was so young. I mean, what I did was I could have spent that summer of 2003 like vacationing or doing whatever, but I like went to work as an unpaid employee of the old owners as like the sale went through to the new owner. And so that kind of I think gained some respect among my comrades at the deli grocery. And I was only there for 2 years, but I have such fond memories of Diamond Street Market. It was just like the kitchen at my family's restaurant. It was a small little family. We had the same radio station pairing. It was better hours because we didn't work this long dinner shift throughout the night, but it was hard work. It was tremendous work, and I'd have to wake up so early in the morning to open the doors and put cash in the till.
And your mom was not happy?
No, she thought it was a really bad idea.
The whole time, even when it started working out, or?
It worked out in that it was shut down by Katrina. So it let me live a kind of comfortable bachelory existence for 2 years and have a ton of fun in New Orleans and learn to, I think what I most learned was because I was not interested in running a business, and I'm still not interested in running a business. It's just not my thing. I took 2 business classes at Tulane as an undergrad, and I failed both of them. So I'm really, really bad at business, really bad. But what I learned at this place was how to be with people. I can be shyish. I can be kind of non-communicative, I think. So it was a whole new kind of universe, but in a way, but completely resembling my childhood, how to not to be a boss so much, but like how to be, a friend and a fellow employee and like work alongside people. Also how to be good to a customer base, which I had never really experienced all that much before. How to be a symbol of a neighborhood, because I immediately became one as the only place to buy groceries or buy a sandwich, one of the only places to get a sandwich at lunch in the neighborhood. And so that's what I learned. It was about how to be comfortable with people, how to be, part of a crowd, how to stand out in the crowd, how to talk to people. Talking to people, I think, is very, very difficult for a lot of us. And this was before, I had a phone, but not a smartphone back then. And I think we're much worse at communicating and talking now than we were 10, 15 years ago. So it was learning kind of this new skill. which I'm still learning, and which helped when I was doing these oral histories, these barbecue oral histories. It definitely helped talking to strangers, putting a mic in someone's face, pressing record, asking them personal, intimate questions about themselves, their families, their histories. That's tough work.
Yeah. What advice, when you look back, would you have given that 23-year-old or 22, however old you were, managing that?
Oh, just I enjoyed it. I never took it. It always felt like fun and non-serious, which I think like a good job should feel like, or at least something that kind of small. I would have spent more time. I can answer it this way. So my book is dedicated to all the kitchen employees, restaurant employees that I've worked alongside throughout my whole life. So this is from the beginning to the end. And it's specifically dedicated to the individuals whose names I can't remember anymore, just because of time, just because, this was pre-Facebook days. This was write down people's names and numbers, also because names and numbers are just lost because of storms or movement and exiles and everything else. So I wish I remembered my employees, and I hate calling them my employees, but they were my employees at Diamond Street Market better. I wish I run into them and I call them to catch up with them. About half, maybe a little more than half, still live in New Orleans. Others have been exiled all over the South. And I just love like catching up with them. I love talking to them again. I love telling stories about working and running this grocery store together.
Is there anything you would have done differently?
I would have, I wish I would have spent more time. The time I spent in the place, I usually had a book in hand or a newspaper in hand. And so there was still this kind of like divide, this like shyness. Like I was always doing the crossword puzzle, or I was reading the paper. And I think this is what people do in like old school groceries, right? You have the old man in the corner with the newspaper. And like that was me. I wish it was more.
You were just 22 and
I wish there was more. I wish like I injected or maybe had more personality while running that place. I don't know. I got thanked a lot because the old owners were very crotchety, ornery, unfriendly, unliked people in the neighborhood. And so when I came in, I injected this like new juice and this new energy, and it was great. And I wish I would have taken that to another level. I don't know how at that age. I think it was still 22 is a time when most people are not running their own businesses. They're not asked to be a part of a community. Or at least you're just doing those things. And so there is still kind of a chasm in between you and the world at that age, coming right out of college or still wishing you were in college and like missing your friends and not having that same group. So I don't know if I could have done anything differently.
Yeah. When did writing enter the picture? Had it always been there in the background, or was it after Katrina, when you left the deli and moved to New York, that really started to creep in?
Yeah, writing did. Reading, I've always been a tremendous reader. That's how I spend my time. My free time and my work time is reading. I write a lot about.
I'll pull a line out of Tim Ferriss's book and ask you what books have had the biggest impact on you.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's always, So, I mean, it's always different books, like in different weeks, different moments, different like periods. I often like every few years I craft like a top 10 list, and the book that is like always on there is a book from my childhood, and I think all of our childhoods, and that's Wild Things, Where the Wild Things Are. And I think like all great young person literature, it offers a lesson and a message. The lesson that book offers is maybe the most important one in the world, is just like, let it go, don't be serious, life is short, be a kid, have that adventure. I love that book. It's still tremendous to me, and I still try to read it about it once a year.
Okay. So you've been reading forever. So then you get to New York, and that's when writing kind of starts coming in?
Yeah. So I moved to New York with nothing, like nothing besides the idea of wanting to one day live in New York. And with a grocery store that was shuttered, so I moved up there. And I slept on family members' couches, eventually got my own place, and then enrolled in a few writing courses and cooking courses, because I had never taken a cooking course, even though I had grown up in kitchens and run my own kitchen at this point. So I took a few courses throughout the fall and spring of '05 and '06. And then I went back to school. I went to grad school in history, and I wrote graduate papers like we all did, and I remember pitching a lot. I was encouraged by my writing teacher to pitch, and I pitched and didn't sell one thing, didn't get one thing printed. And I don't remember it bumming me out. It bums me out now. Like it feels like it's part of the game. It's part of the work now.
You mean getting turned down for stuff, or
getting turned down, getting rejected? Yeah, okay. Yeah. But it also like adds like fire to the fuel, and you're like, I'm gonna try this again, or try this better, and do it again. So yeah, so it was grad school, and then when I moved back to New Orleans, that's in 2008.
Was that always the plan to move back?
No, I didn't want. No, it was. I applied to a bunch of graduate schools, and this was the best fit. They were the only ones that offered a full tuition, and so you kind of have to take that in grad school. And but coming back in 2008, I didn't want to come back in 2008. I wasn't ready to come back. It's not like I wanted to be in New York or stay in New York, but there was almost a fear of New Orleans. New Orleans, I had kept coming back in '06, '07, 2008. Because I had family here, because I still had a deep connection to the city, but it was a bad place. It was a place that was not. It couldn't decide if it was going to recover or completely fall apart, I think, at that moment. And it was really 2009, 2010 were the big years when you saw kind of a real push in the city. You had a political change. You had a tremendous amount of young people, new blood move into the city, for better and worse. The education system changed, and you had the most important thing maybe was that you had a huge amount of money move into the city, and so you had a whole bunch of new businesses, a bunch of tech businesses, which I know little about, but I see their logos and I see their offices, a bunch of internet companies. And you had a bunch of restaurants and new chefs move into town. And so from '08 to 10, it was an ugly place. And it was really in 10 that I kind of got my feel of the city again. And I think a lot of people did. And it started to feel like a viable city once again.
How is it different even now than when you were younger?
I used to visit here once a month to visit my grandmother. She lived here, and she lived in a neighborhood that would be considered severely depressed. It was a bad, quote unquote, bad neighborhood. Drugs, gun violence. I recently wrote a story last year that was nominated for a James Beard Award about that street. It's called Broad Street.
I read it this morning. It's fantastic.
Oh, you did? Thank you. Yeah. So, and it's about the changes that street underwent, but also that it doesn't really change. It hasn't really changed. Some new businesses have moved in. Some old businesses closed because of the storm. But maybe New Orleans doesn't change. I'm still deciding, like, if that's a thing. Like, does New Orleans change? New Orleans has a lot less people than it did 12 years ago. It has a lot less African-American people, a lot less, like, bearers of tradition and culture than it did 12 years ago. These are all really terrible things. But in a way, like, was lost or could have been lost is still here. A few, businesses are gone. Neighborhood shops and groceries like mine disappeared. But New Orleans still feels the same. I don't know if it's the architecture. I don't know if it's the people. I don't know if it's the culture or the way we speak. It's something in the air, but it just doesn't change. It just doesn't. And that's both comfortable and maybe slightly like insane making, because New Orleans has a lot of problems. Like, I think a lot of places have a lot of problems, and we want, problems to be fixed, and we want things to change. But there's also something very beautiful about, living with problems and, not even conquering problems or like curing them, but doing so maybe like incrementally. So New Orleans it's famous for it has high crime rates. That's definitely, those crime rates are smaller than they were years ago, but they're still here, and they will forever be here, and crime will never be cured. But there's something about the resilience of New Orleanians, like living with that and making fun of that, cracking jokes at that. A couple years ago, my girlfriend and I dressed up as New Orleans crime maps. And that was just like, so we costume in New Orleans. We costume famously for like Mardi Gras, but we also costume for Halloween. We costume for other things. And it's a big thing to like create your own costume. Like everyone creates their own costume. You don't go buy a costume. You like craft your costume, sometimes like a year in advance. And a few years ago, the big thing for people moving to New Orleans was to go check out, and other cities probably have this, but to go check out your block, your neighborhood, your address on the New Orleans crime map online. You can see, what was going on over a certain amount of time, in your area. And the crimes would be coded with these kind of really goofy looking icons that were like brightly rainbow lit. And so we dressed up as the crime map, and it was like the most New Orleans thing I've ever done.
What were some other costumes that rival that?
Oh, well, I love dressing up as New Orleans things, New Orleans like ideas and cultures. 2 years ago, no, it was Mardi Gras last year. So Mardi Gras 2015. Just before that, so Mardi Gras is always in the spring. It jumps around, sometimes February, sometimes March, or I guess in the late winter. But in the fall of before that Mardi Gras, someone had painted Marie Laveau's tomb. Marie Laveau, if you don't know, or listeners don't know, was a voodoo priestess in the 1800s in New Orleans. She's one of the most famous kind of people associated with the city. She was controversial during her day. She was a hero to many. She was like, a witchy villain to others. And her tomb is located in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, and it is on the itinerary of every tour group, of most tourists who come to the city. You go and see her tomb, and famously, her tomb is a place where if you want a wish granted, if you want some good luck, you go and mark 3 X's on her tomb. This is what recent tradition says. And that tomb, because of all these X's, is which is really defacement. Like it is against the law to deface her tomb, or any of the tombs in that cemetery or other cemeteries. It's falling apart. It's crumbling. The outer layers are just like no longer there. And so someone painted the tomb with this bright pink Pepto-Bismol-y latex paint. And all these tombs are kind of white, marbly looking, and here's this bright pink tomb. And the city freaked out, especially the conservation architecture people, because they said the tomb would no longer be allowed to breathe with this latex paint, and so they had to spend tens of thousands of dollars removing the paint and then repainting it white and whatever else. And so it was like a big thing in the news that fall and winter. And so I made her tomb, and so I dressed up as this big and the tombs in New Orleans, if you don't know, are like above ground, of course, because of Catholic tradition and because of our high water tables. And so her tomb is about 8-10 feet tall. So I dressed up as this. I took a refrigerator box and painted it pink and like added all the details and the X's, and it was gorgeous. But I dressed up as her pink tomb and walked around the city for like a beautiful sunny Mardi Gras day.
That's amazing. I like that one. Very good. On a more serious note, what does it mean to you to be from the South?
From the South? Well, it's wrestling with all the good, bad, and ugly that is very, very evident. We're reminded of it every day as Southerners, or living in the South. United States has problems from corner to corner. The world has problems. But there's something about the South's problems that are in living memory, and I can mention many things, terrible things that happened all the time this past weekend. So it's about confronting that, it's about wrestling with that, it's about challenging that, it's about hope and fighting for something different. And I tried to do that in the barbecue book, in the One True Barbecue. It's not a book about prep and barbecue. It's not a book It's about a people wrestling, I like that word, with race in the South, with religion in the South, with culture in the South, with economics in the South, being poor in the South. And it's these pitmasters, these barbecue cooks, telling these stories about how they have to kind of struggle against the South and Southern history and memory.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you moved to New York, do you
Mm-hmm.
feel like the North has a similar struggle in a different context of any kind, or is it comparable in any way?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, there's plenty of poverty. There's poor race relations in New York and throughout the North and throughout the West and everywhere else. But I don't know. There's something about. I mean, it has everything to do with I think the just recent memory and with the civil rights period. For a lot of people, like that's in their lifetime. They can remember that. They fought, that or fought against that. And you look further in the South, like Jim Crow is still, in people's memory. That generation is disappearing, but it's still there. The last enslaved people were living when my mother was born, when my mother was a young woman. And to kind of like think about that, to fathom that is almost unfathomable. That history, that awful history, is not so distant.
Yeah, it was really evident too in Australia among the Aboriginal population that was there, how recent that is, even more so than America. And to kind of see them only just now beginning to grapple with some of the things that we've grappled with, not particularly well, maybe, but yeah. I want to talk a bit about your grad school decision and why you went to grad school, because I think a lot of listeners and people that I talk to, it comes up a lot, right? Is this the right decision? And am I just doing it because I don't know what's next in my journey? And, any number of things that we tell ourselves. So when you chose to go back to New Orleans and go to grad school, what was going through your head?
I was a pretty bad undergrad student. I mean, I managed to graduate in 4 years. I graduated with 2 majors. I transferred once, but I didn't. I went to my classes. I failed some classes. But I was like, I don't know if I did it right. Or maybe I did do it right. Maybe undergrad, years are about everything, besides school, besides college, besides attending classes. I mean, I had fun. I had friends. Sometimes I wish I had more fun or different fun. But there was a lot of partying. We'll just call it that. Grad school, I almost went back to school as soon as I graduated from college. Like, I remember and the same thing happened in high school. I was just a very average high school student, but I remember as soon as I graduated from high school and as soon as I graduated from college, I drew up these reading lists. And I recently went back and found the reading list that I made in 2003. Like, a reading list is this is what you're going to read this summer. You are missing these books from your life. This will offer an education that was not provided to you in college, because college has its own tremendous amount of problems. And because you have to take courses you don't want to take, like Biology 101 or whatever. And so it was immediately after that I was able to this is where education starts. Even though I was running this grocery deli, I was doing a tremendous amount of reading, both very specific and varied. So when it came time to go to grad school, I was super ready, because grad school is all about reading too much and then writing too much. And so I was there. I was ready to do those things. I had felt like I had given myself a kind of pre-grad school education or warm-up in the years before. And so I was this tremendous grad school student, and I loved being in grad school, and I took it very, very seriously, and I turned in every single paper on time, and read every single book where a lot of my peers would skim those books. And it was really important to me to take it very, very, very seriously. Maybe I was just more mature, but there was something about creating, and I think we all do this sometime in our life, those who are interested in like being smarter or being better or learning something new or, whatever it is, or traveling to a new place, is that like those are the things that we have to like take upon ourselves. Like we have to force ourselves to do that, because otherwise, undergrad, you're given a list of things that you have to take a lot of times, or at least the options you're given are not very fair, not very interesting. The difference between physics 101 and biology 101, let's say, I don't care about either, but I did have to take one, and I did have to sit in that classroom for 4 months.
So I guess, was there an end game to school, like to going to grad school? Were you like, I want to go just to learn more then? Or was it, I want to go because I want to take this next step in my career?
Yeah, well, it was all about to learn, and I actually I went to the New School for Social Research, which is this like super liberal, radical school in the Village in New York City, and I originally entered as an anthropology student because that's what I graduated with in college. So I took 1 or 2 anthropology classes, and then I took 1 cross-listed history class, and by week 2. I had completely fell for my history professor, Oz Frankel. He, like, just for his teaching style and his reading list and just the conversations we had in class. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to follow this guy's path. Like, I don't want to be an anthropologist. And I had taken 1 history course when I was 19 years old. I'd never studied history really. And so I just like, it was like another kind of adventure thing. It's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna switch grad school majors in a way, and so that's what I did. So that's what led me to a history degree and then a second history degree, solely because of this guy's class.
So it sounds like throughout your journey, you keep having all these adventures, and that's kind of how I describe my journey as well.
Mm-hmm.
Have any of them failed for you?
Yeah, I mean, only like relationships. We think of relationships as adventures, yeah. But nothing beyond that. No. No, and like with grad school, I don't think I answered your question, but no, I didn't. When I signed up, I didn't know if I'd like go. I didn't know if I'd go get a PhD after. I didn't know if I wanted to be a professor. I didn't know if I wanted to be, a teacher. I didn't know if I wanted to write books. It was just like, oh, I'm getting paid, or it costs very little to like take these classes. I get to do what I want to do, which is read and write and have these interesting discussions. And so I did that for a few years. And then by the end, I knew that I didn't want to be a professor. Like I wanted to be a writer. And so that was the kind of the great leap to tell your advisor, like, I'm not going to do what you do. Like, I'm not going to go on the job market. I'm not going to make myself available and go, be a college professor, a history professor. Like, I want to be a writer. So that's what I did. And, is that, I'm a freelancer now, so it might not be the most financially sound kind of, path to take. But I think it's the right one. But I think, we'll have to talk again in like 10, 15 years. And you could ask, was that, an accident or a mistake? And I think I'll say no. Hopefully I'll say no.
Yeah, I think you're on a pretty good path. I foresee good things for you, my friend.
Thank you.
So I know we have to wrap up here, but I do want to ask, I just have like a couple quick fire questions, and you can take as long as you want to answer them. But we'll go through them. What is your favorite food city?
My favorite food city, I love right now. It's Houston, Texas. Surprisingly enough, it surprised me. Growing up in South Louisiana, you were actually taught to hate Houston. You are in Lafayette, where I'm from, because it's so close and the pull of it is so great, and it's so kind of monstrously big. But Houston is now the most diverse city in America and the most ethnically diverse city in America. And you can go there and eat anything in the world. So it's not like I'm going to go have Chinese food. It's like, what region of China, do you want to eat in? You have to do a lot of driving out into the suburbs, which sprawl onwards and onwards and onwards forever. But there's like beauty to that, like humanity. It just like somehow that city works. It's a lot like Los Angeles. It's this thing that has just taken over the landscape. I love it there.
Yeah, the drivers are hellions. We went through there on
Yeah.
the road trip, and it was like immediately within the city limits. I was like, oh my God, like where did all these aggro people come from?
Yeah, I was like,
It
this
was
is dangerous.
really
And it is
intense.
dangerous.
Yeah, it's totally dangerous. It was really, really intense. But yeah, I went to a great restaurant opening there of all things. So there you go. Do you have a routine that you follow?
I have a writing routine. I force myself to sit at my desk from 8:30 to around 4:30. And hopefully I'm doing some typing. Sometimes I think like a lot of writers, I am mindlessly surfing the web or, putting off answering emails. I haven't brought myself to shut down the internet or put one of those apps on my computer. That might come one day. But that's my routine, sitting at my desk. I treat that as work, like going to the office. There's a Robert Caro, who's a famous kind of writer, journalist, historian, lives in New York, and he's an old guy now, but he writes these tremendous volumes, like 800 pages that win him Pulitzer prizes and stuff. He's the greatest of writers and the greatest of like people, and he famously dresses up. He puts on a suit and tie every day and walks to his office and like sits down at his desk and writes. And that, I think, is the most beautiful existence in the world. I at least, like, I will not sit at my desk in pajamas or in my underwear. Like, I force myself to, like, put on pants and a shirt. So I'm not quite Robert Caro, but I like to imagine that I'm doing what he does.
You're a better man than me, my friend. What are you most proud of?
I'm proud of the work I do. I'm proud of, we didn't talk about this, but I'm a high school teacher, too, in New Orleans. I'm a public school teacher. I'm supremely proud of that work because the pay is abysmal. The work is tremendous, and it's great fun, and it's tiring and trying. But the students are awesome, and I've been there for 4 years at this high school called Bard Early College, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that work. No one I mean, everyone knows this, but high school teachers or school teachers in the United States are so grossly underpaid that like no one should be doing that work for what they're getting paid to do. It's all about like making yourself feel good, bleeding heart type work, whether you're in public or private institutions. And so that's what makes me proud, and proud of the people like I teach alongside. It's just a great group.
Great. How do you define happiness?
I define happiness as like being able to communicate with people, because I think it's something I struggle with and have struggled with, and I see it as a kind of universal struggle. At least that's what we're told nowadays. We're too into our phones, or we communicate through texts and other bad ways, and there's something that makes me very happy about being in conversation with one or with a group. Great.
Let's talk about what's next for you. So the barbecue stuff now has been, you have the book out. It's been years and years. What comes after that?
Well, hopefully by very soon I'll have another book proposal out there, and so we'll see about that. But I continue freelancing, so. Right after we get off the phone, I sit back at my desk and keep on writing. So it's the freelancer's life. It's all about little steps and meeting editors, and this. It's a fight. It's a fun fight. It can be very frustrating, but that's I think the long future and the long game. I want to be in the magazines that I read, and I want to be read. So there's a bit of like an ego-y thing too. You have to feed that and be comfortable with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. It was awesome to have you on. Can you let people know how to find you and find the book?
Yeah, so you can find me at my website. My name, I should say, is spelled differently. It's Ryan, spelled R-I-E-N. My last name is Fertel, F-E-R-T-E-L, and that's my website, ryanfertel.com. My book is available everywhere, all online outlets. All bookstores can order it or should be carrying it. It's called The One True Barbecue, and it is out by Simon & Schuster's Touchstone Press.
Ryan, thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. Don't forget, you can check out show notes at wecouldmakethat.com/BBQ. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider sharing it with your friends. Sharing is caring.